Hey, what's up everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and in this video, we're going to discuss the top lane at Worlds 2021. I'm going to do top, jungle, mid, and then bot lane as a duo. I want to discuss the champions that we've seen, a lot of the matchups that we've seen, and then I want to talk about player talent and not necessarily champion pools in terms of what we've seen, but like our confidence in a specific player being able to play like both sides of a matchup and stuff like that. And the reason why I wanted to make this kind of video is because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I think that we put a lot of expectations on different teams to draft specific ways, and sometimes they just don't do it, or they make questionable draft decisions, and it's tough to feel like those criticisms hold a lot of weight if there isn't like a further explanation of what else they could be doing or what else they should be expecting going into their matchups. So I'm going to try to do a little bit of that. Like, it's obviously a very difficult task. But, we'll talk about that. And we're going to go through the champions that have been played here and then the scoreboards. So first up is Graves, right? Graves is a very popular champion right now, is 11-6, has a good win rate. I think everyone would agree that Graves is a good champion. I think all the professional teams would agree that Graves is a good champion, and it's a reasonable pick to make at Worlds. My problem is that I think that Graves does put some limitations on your draft from a jungle and support for jungle and support, because you will not have engage from the Graves. Like in my last video, I talked a little bit about pure League of Legends. Like, Graves is like a pure League of Legends kind of champion where you pick it because you know that you're going to have a slight advantage in the laning phase in most matchups, and that with that additional power when you get to those dragon fights or the baron fights, you're confident that he'll be able to put out enough damage to justify limiting your draft from an engage perspective. We'll go into more of the matchups when we're looking at the scoreboards. But that's generally my thoughts on Graves. I think that Graves is a good champion, not a great champion. Put some restrictions on your draft that people don't really talk about. And is definitely something that should be questioned more as a blind pick. Jace is obviously a champion that basically every professional top laner should be able to play, because it gives your team an additional win condition. Like, if you can build a large enough lead in the laning phase with Jace, it's very similar to the Graves situation. The difference is that like the poke damage is a little bit better from Jace. The repeatability of it is better. The long range nature of it is better. The acceleration gate helping the mobility of your entire team is often overlooked, but is a very positive benefit for most teams. The problem is that it's not really blind. You can blind pick it, but there are a lot of matchups that if teams were more competent, they would punish it harder. So I don't know. I don't have a way to. I think that Tim Oracle's Elixir, the guy Tim Seven Hoyson or Seven Husin from Oracle's Elixir, I think he has like the quote unquote counter rate. I think like Jace is a champion that you really do want to have a high counter rate on, where you're typically picking him second. But again, there's limitations with Jace. Kennen's a great champion. The amount of pressure that he can put on a team just with one teleport flank is incredible. The expectations are extremely high when you have a Kennen on your team composition, and it's a win condition when you're losing as well. He can completely turn a team fight. Just a game-breaking ultimate. Does require the player to play the champion at a high level. But even in the worst-case scenario where it's just a guy running around with the ultimate, you can be somewhat impactful. But there is a big difference between a very good Kennen player and, the not as good Kennen players, and that's going to be an important way to look at top laners moving forward in this competition. Gwen, good champion, doesn't have a lot of engage. It's similar to the Graves and Jace in that way. I think that it was very interesting when we saw Gwen against Graves specifically, because even when the Gwen would lose that matchup or lose the game, I think it was pretty obvious that she was like the better side of things. And she puts a similar kind of limitation onto your team composition, but she can also carry the game harder, do more damage than Graves, and be a little bit more disruptive in team fights, and has like that game breaking upside where Graves is a little bit more manageable. But a good champion overall. Camille, we have a lot of teams that are just big fans of Camille. I think that the Camille versus Kennen matchup is something that we'll continue to see. Has good engage options, good disruption in the back line, does scale well into the late game. But it's another champion where you probably don't want to blind pick it because there are counters that are pretty powerful. But with that being said, even when the other team counters Camille, if the team isn't as good, like if the teams have different skill levels, then a lot of the times the Camille is not going to be punished correctly or at all. And with jungle pressure, you could flip the matchup probably. Just get her far enough ahead. Renekton. Renekton is another champion where you have a lot of ways to do your job when you're in a losing position, which is one of the reasons I think teams like playing Renekton, is he doesn't need to have a good game to be impactful. And a lot of these top laners have played so much Renekton that it's second nature to them. They can always operate at a high level, even when they're losing, make plays when losing. And that's a very important dimension to champions that we probably overlook as a community. Just something to keep in mind. Gnar, good champion, very impactful ultimate. Can be played around, should be played around better by a lot of these professional teams. We saw Armut have a very good Gnar game where he was very impactful, jumping in and creating pressure with their AoE ultimate. All of these top laners can play Gnar. Jax. Jax is a specific counter. So a lot of these games, Jax was counter pick and still didn't manage to have a positive win rate. I don't think that's a problem of the champion itself. It's probably more... it probably has more to do with the teams that were playing it. Fiora, good champion, good counter to Aurelia, I think, and some other top lane champions where the Fiora just kind of got out of control. And that's the upside of having a mechanically gifted top laner or a top laner with a very diverse champion pool. Sorry, just got a voicemail. Okay. Gangplank. All these guys can play Gangplank. Good champion. Scales really well. Impactful ultimate. Doesn't give you the engage options, but does give you like disengage options and forcing the enemy team to disperse with their ultimate. So that's nice. Again, that's another champion where there is a difference mechanically between the very good players and the not very good players. But for the most part, most of these people can play Gangplank. Stylistically, it doesn't fit with a lot of what their team needs. So we don't see it as often from some of these teams, but good champion overall. Lucian's an important champion for the same reason that Jace and Graves are important champions. The damage upside, the ability to control the laning phase is all very powerful. It's a good flex pick. You can play it in 3 roles now. So, I do like teams that play Lucian. It's very feast or famine, but when you are the better team, you should be willing to play something like Lucian and play around it correctly. Wukong. Wukong's like an Armut special. I don't hate that. Very good engage option. Tankier than it probably should be. Is good against Jace. Aatrox, we saw a couple of Aatrox games. That was a little bit surprising, but I think in one of the patches leading up to the tournament, we saw Aatrox buffs, and I think I did actually kind of expect it. Rumble, same thing. There was like a slight buff. We saw it. We saw Doinby play at one point in the mid lane. I forget which players played it in the top lane, but very impactful ultimate. Doesn't really give you a great engage, but can help start a fight or end a fight. Gragas is just a trash top laner, I think. The way that the teams build it is really frustrating, just going full AP. Not clear why RNG likes playing it so much, but they have a losing win rate with it, I think, throughout the last year. It's just a champion that I guess Xiaohu will default to when they're trying to get a specific type of thing out of their team composition. I don't know. Just not a fan. Aurelia, we saw Birdall get stomped on it. That was kind of just a bad situation in that game. I don't think that it's like Aurelia that's the problem. I don't think that Birdall is the problem. I just think it was a combination of those two things plus the game getting out of hand. Jarvan, I mean, good engage options, but like you're not going to win that lane. Like if you have an extreme hyper carry jungle and mid lane and you want to play around top side, bring those players up to the top lane, dive the top laner and get a lead that way, then fine. But it just seems like a mistake at this point because there are better options to do what Jarvan will do from the top lane. I'm not sure what these teams are doing picking J4 top with the types of team compositions they're running it with. And that's an issue where teams just convince themselves, oh, this champion is strong. Let's pick this champion and shoehorn it into our team no matter what. And that's a big mistake. Olaf, kind of the same thing. That was more of just an Adam special. Whatever. Poppy, we saw Poppy top twice from Eevee, I think. A very limited player. That's what happens when you have a limited player is they pull stuff like this out. And you'll watch other teams play like Poppy jungle and it looks good. And then you're like, well, why are they playing Poppy top and giving it to a player that's not very good? Like, those draft limitations will be impactful moving forward, but it's not going to look as extreme in most scenarios because I think these top laners, for the most part, I think most of these matchups have similar players. Then we have Set, good champion, not as good as it used to be. Syndra, Xiaohu special. Malphite, which is definitely a champion we should probably see more of because of the types of drafts that have happened at Worlds. And then Tryndamere. So let's take a look at some of the matchups that we've seen. So Khan against Nuguri, two very talented players. The Jace against the Graves. Both sides can win this matchup, so this is a skill matchup. Both have limitations for their team. That's fine. Syndra was picked as a counter to Kennen. Adam picked Set into the Kennen, but like it's not meant to completely counter it. I think it's just about getting a somewhat free laning phase for the Set, but obviously Homalife had the better side of that matchup. Gwen against Renekton. This is the kind of thing where I think that Gwen against Renekton is fine. Like, yes, the Renekton can get onto Gwen and escape some of that like immune ability, but Gwen definitely outscales. If this game was closer and was able to get pushed into the late game, you could see a spot where Gwen outscales the Renekton and is more impactful in late game team fights. Graves against Set. Again, that's just Graves' favorite. He can do whatever he wants in that lane. Graves against Aatrox. This seems like it seemed like Someday was having a really good game, and I think that the reason there's a big CS discrepancy is because of the fact that they lost. So the last 5 minutes they built up a big CS lead from Flandre. I don't think that this is a limitation of the matchup necessarily. Camille against Jax. So Jax is a counter to Camille theoretically, but it's not like a game breaker. It's not a game breaker every time. Rumble against Gnar. That's a classic matchup. And we'll go through all these because it'll kind of shape how we look at these matchups moving forward. Jace against Graves, we've seen that. Graves against Jax, reasonable. Gwen against Camille. I think that this matchup is probably fine. This draft was just much better than Homolife's draft. I've talked about that a few times, that one specifically. Rumble, or Olaf against Kennen. Xiao, who's good at Kennen. Nuguri against Fudge. Kennen against Camille. I think that Camille is supposed to do pretty good in this matchup, but Nuguri is a very good player. I don't think that this really shows either player having a crazy good performance. It was just a very close game. C9 should have won this game, if I remember correctly. Gnar against Graves. Graves is definitely the better side of that. Better engage option for better engage opportunities from the Gnar, but that's besides the point. Wukong against Graves. So this is something that is important, because if this is truly a good matchup for the Wukong, or if there are other similar type matchups where Armut can play the Wukong into Graves, into Jace, into Lucian, then it's probably a good idea to just ban the Wukong to avoid that. Fiora against Gnar. That's just Fiora favored. All right, Lucian against Camille. So Lucian's going to have the advantage in the early game. And Xiao, who's a very good Lucian player, so that's scary. Camille against Gnar. You want to be on the Camille side there. Jace against Rumble. I'm pretty sure that this matchup specifically can go both ways. I just think this is how this game played out. Gangplank against Kennen. So Gangplank is another option into Kennen that we've seen throughout play-in stage. Camille and Jax. So again, the Jax is the better part of this matchup, but not completely game-breaking. Jax into the Graves. We've seen that before. Jace against Poppy. That's just asking to get your face punched in. Renekton against Kennen. Okay. Gragas against Jace. Again, you're just asking to get your face punched in. Graves against Gwen. Graves won it. Graves won this lane. Well, I guess they didn't really win that lane that much. This was just like a team difference or a game difference. It's not. I'm not saying that it was the two teams. Graves against Jace, we've seen that. Lucian against Jace, we've seen that. I think that Lucian is very good against Jace. I'm pretty sure that's just a positive matchup for the Lucian. But if I'm wrong about that, feel free to tell me and explain why in the comments. Jace against Kennen. I've definitely lost that matchup before as the Jace, but I understand why they should potentially be the better side. Jax against Kennen. Like, you see, there's a lot of repeating matchups, so these trades are going to be pretty common, I think. Jace against Poppy, the Jace is going to win that. Jace against Malphite, like, when you're the Malphite, you're not playing for the laning phase. You're playing to use your ultimate to be impactful in the late game. Wasn't able to pull it off against T1, but I think that the draft strategy isn't horrible. Kennen against Jace, kind of the same thing, and kind of just signifies that it's a skill matchup. Trinamir against Gangplank. I don't know anything about that matchup. Renekton against Graves. That's not super surprising. This shows you, like, champion limitations and player limitations can have a big... They can seem like gigantic differences, especially when the two teams are at a talent discrepancy. Kennen against Graves. So, like, we're going to see a lot of Kennen. We're going to see a lot of Graves, a lot of Lucian, a lot of Jace. Probably a decent amount of Camille and Renekton. Olaf, Renekton, Aatrox, Gwen, Graves, Jace. Graves, Gwen. Graves, Gwen. Aurelia, Fiora, that was a shit show. Kennen against Jarvan. I hated this. This just annoyed me very much. Gnar against Renekton. That's a pretty generic matchup. We've seen that a million times. And then Jax against Gwen. So now what I want to do is I went through Khan's games, because going into the World Championship, I think a lot of people didn't have as high of an opinion of Khan as they should have. A couple of years ago, Khan was thought of as the best top laner in the world. Then they had kind of a down year with FPX, and then they swapped out Nuguri for Khan. Nuguri was coming off a world championship. Khan was coming off of a down year. But Damwon is showing that they're willing to play around Khan, give him good carry champions. He's played Graves, Jax, Graves, Jace, Lucian, Jax. So the 2 Jax games, like, that is picked with the intention of, one, theoretically countering the enemy top lane champion, but also outscaling. And you might not get as many jungle resources in the Jax games, but it shows that they're willing to give Khan some additional draft capital, even in games where they're not planning on playing around him because they trust him to make good enough decisions during the game. Fudge. I'm going to go to Kana next. So Kana, I really think that Khan, Kana, and Xiaohu are the 3 difference makers in the top lane. Like, you can put any of those players on either side of a matchup and feel like they can navigate it well enough to not give up a huge disadvantage. I think when you get to players like Fudge, I think even though we could theoretically see him on both sides of those matchups in the LCS, at Worlds with the talent discrepancy, like, I'm not saying that he's trash. I think he's a good player, but he's not Khan, he's not Kana, he's not Xiaohu. And then it's questionable, like, how would he perform against a player like Flandre? I think that Morgan has, kind of, everybody else has had their expectations met. I've been kind of underwhelmed by Morgan. I had higher expectations for Morgan, and we might see that in the future, but kind of disappointing at this point. And then Armut against Fudge, I think just stylistically, you would probably have more draft pressure on C9 than Armut, because C9 might feel forced to ban like Wukong, because it has seemed good when he's played it. But the reason why I wanted to do this is because I think that these 3 players specifically are the 3 best. If I was ranking them, I would put Xiaohu. I'd probably put Kana above Khan, but those 2 are very close, so let's just put them together. Then I would put Flandre. Then I think that the rest of them are just not difference makers. Like, they're not going to be the reason why I say, oh, this team is going to beat that team because of this matchup. So let's take a look at the quarterfinal matchups. All right. So Xiaohu against Flandre. I think that Xiaohu has the talent advantage. The problem is that RNG has a lot of they end up with a lot of very questionable drafts. Where if we have Xiaohu playing Lucian, playing Jace, playing Lucian, Graves, Jace, or counterpicking with something like a Syndra. Like, if Syndra's actually a good matchup into Kennen, they could do that every single game. If they just want to give Xiaohu Kennen, they could do that. It's gonna put a lot of pressure on EDG to draft a specific way, to have answers prepared with Flandre. So let's go to... So, Jace, Graves, Jace. So, that's really what RNG needs to have figured out, is what are they going to do with Jace and Graves. So the one thing I'd be concerned with is, is the Gragas something that they actively pick into that matchup? So let's just take a look at that real quick. RNG. Okay. Gragas into the Jace. I don't like seeing that. Camille against Gwen. Okay. And then Gwen against Aatrox. That is a little concerning. I really don't want to see Gragas out of them. I think that you're like, if you're gonna potentially play TF and then you're gonna play Gragas top, I mean, that being a possibility is kind of scary to me. So I would give RNG the advantage in the top lane, with the caveat that they can always draft themselves into a bad spot. Genji against C9. I think that Rascal and Birdall are probably better than Fudge. I think either one of them are probably better than Fudge. I think that if it just depends on what Genji's mentality is towards the game. If they think to themselves, we don't need to completely outskill Cloud9, we can just outdraft them, play the game regularly, and should be able to carve out an advantage. So let's put Rascal in there, because Rascal will be a little bit more predictable in the pick ban phase, but also won't have the ridiculously low outcomes that we've already seen from Birdall at Worlds twice, where they tried to do a carry versus carry matchup and just lost. So that's probably not going to be a big difference maker when predicting that matchup specifically. I think that if Birdall is the player, Birdall gives them the best chance to win spectacularly and the best chance to lose spectacularly. If it's Rascal against Fudge, I think it'll be more it'll be a better opportunity for Fudge to potentially get into good draft positions, because they just keep picking Renekton or something like that, where they would have the opportunity to punish that in the laning phase. So again, in theory, the draft advantage could go either way depending on which player is starting from Gen G. I do think that even in the Rascal scenario, they could draft into a good position. So it's not like that's eliminated when they play Rascal, but the range of outcomes is tighter with Rascal. T1 against Homalife. So Kana against Morgan. This is a spot that should benefit Kana a lot. Kana, like I said, is, one of the best top laners at the tournament. I had that opinion before the tournament started, I think. And I still do. So let's see the last time they played. All right. Lck Regional Finals. So, Kennen Aurelia, Kennen Renekton. So this is a spot where both teams are very familiar with one another. Morgan can carry a game as Aurelia. That was banned out in the... Oh, they banned it. They banned themselves in the last game. Let's see what T1 is doing. T1's getting rid of Renekton. T1's getting rid of Camille. T1's getting rid of Renekton and Camille. T1 is getting rid of Renekton and Camille. Getting rid of the Camille. And then getting rid of the Jace and Aurelia. Oh no, getting rid of the Camille. Giving up the Renekton. So that low priority on Kennen could be a problem. I think that it's probably changed at this point. I think that after this match, they were probably like, "Hey, Morgan, maybe you should maybe you should refresh your Kennen strength and make sure that you understand the matchup from both sides, just in case we want to pick it away from Kana in the next match." So Kana's obviously able to play Kennen, and we know that Kana can play Jace, Graves, Lucian, and all of the other good top lane champions. He's been very good for the past year and a half, 2 years. So even outside of the draft, I could see them creating an advantage through the top lane. Okay. And then the last matchup is Khan against Armut. So this, it's funny, like the fact that you only get so many bans against a team like Mad Lions, you really have to figure out which player do we think we could use the draft preparation. Who can we target in the draft? Not the easiest, but who would it be the most effective against? I think that against Armut, if you want to play Graves, Jace, or Lucian in the top lane, then you should actively pick ban around Armut. I think that we've seen in this tournament, you don't have to pick ban around bot lane for the most part, unless you want to ban away like a Thresh second rotation after an Aphelios is taken. But Elyoya has a bunch of champions he can play that are relatively strong champions. Humanoid, personally, I don't care what champion he gets. Like, he has not been impressive at Worlds. Whether or not you're a Humanoid fan, I wouldn't be able to understand someone who thought that he's played well at this tournament. It's just not the case. So I would probably say give Humanoid whatever they want, pick ban around Armut, create an advantage through Khan in the top lane through the draft, play through Showmaker, because Showmaker is just naturally better than Humanoid anyways. Let's go to MSI. Let's take a look at that matchup that they had. Rumble Days. Knockout stage? Okay. Ornn against Jace. Alright. Gnar against Lucian. Lee was much more powerful back then. Gnar against Wukong. Lucian against Gnar. Gnar against Jace. So I think this is what we're going to see more of, is like champions like Jace. I don't think that we really need to see something like the Ornn, but we know that Khan can play carry champions and tank champions. I think specifically in the matchup against Armut, if I were Damwon Kia, I would want to play around Khan as a potential win condition, not as go even in the laning phase and contribute to team fights later on. I think that especially in the games at Worlds, we've seen top priority be very relevant because of the drafts that we've had, and I think teams want to put their top laners into positions to succeed because of like mid laners just constantly roaming and like the prevalence of TF that we've seen. So yeah, maybe I should have made the mid lane video first, but that's kind of just, my general thoughts. So if I was looking at this again, I think that Xiaohu is probably the best top laner, just from a talent perspective at Worlds. Kana and Khan are both very good top laners as well, and will create advantages against most top laners that are left in the tournament. I think that Flandre is also a very good top laner, but Flandre could probably even be in the Fudge, Morgan, Armut, Rascal, Birdall tier. But like Flandre from back in the day was like a true potential carry top laner when it was less likely to have a carry top laner, just because of the way that drafts kind of played out, and like the strength of tank items back then. But so like I want to give him credit for that, but I could easily see the argument of where he's more similar to Fudge, Morgan, Armut, Rascal, Birdall, and that we have a higher opinion of Flandre because their team has been winning a lot recently. But that's basically it. So, yeah, that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments section who you think the best top laner is at Worlds, and rank them if you'd like. But thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.